Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So, various types of fossils can be categorized as either body fossils, trace fossils, microfossils or macrofossils, subfossils, bioclass, coproliths or gastroliths, burrows and borings, tracks and trails, pseudofossils, etc. Let us quickly review all these types of fossils in the coming slides. Starting with body fossils. Fossilized hard parts of an organism, that means the bones, teeth or shell etc. constitute the body fossils. For example, here you can see the bone of foreleg and the skull of a megahippus horse. These body fossils, they are indicator of actual shape and function of the organism. For example, let's say if you have found a fossil of a particular organism, you can predict what could have been the size of that organism, what is the structural formation of that particular organ, what functions could it have been forming, and so on. So these kind of realistic information you can retrieve if you have got the actual body parts as fossil. In contrast, there is something called trace fossils, where you do not find the actual body part as fossil, but the traces of it, the indirect information of it. For example, let's say if you have got a fossilized footprints, a trail, a burrow of an organism as fossil, they are called as trace fossils. But these trace fossils provide very important informations, though indirectly, but they are also a strong evidence of evolution. For example, let's say in this picture, you can see a Chirotherium footprint. Here you can see a sea star. So based on the structure of this trace, you can predict that it is a fossil of sea star. What was the size of that sea star? Here you can see the size of the foot, whether it had claw or not, what kind of organism it could have been, and so on. So these kind of indirect informations can be retrieved using trace fossils. That is why we call them as indicators of organism's activity, in contrast to the actual body parts which we discussed in case of body fossils. Moving ahead, the next category is microfossils. Now, these fossils are microscopic in nature, as the name suggests. Their size ranges from 0.001 millimeter to 1 millimeter in total. These microfossils, as you remember, initially when we started the lecture, we talked about different subdomains of paleontology, and one of this subdomain was micropaleontology. So these microfossils are studied under this branch of paleontology, which we call as micropaleontology. Here you can see some of these marine microfossils which are microscopic in nature. The microfossils can be divided into different areas of study depending on their composition. If it is made up of silicon dioxide, just as in case of shells of diatoms, or it can be a category of calcium, where the shells of coccolith and foraminifera comes. If it is a microfossil of bone of a vertebrate, they are the phosphate category of microfossils. Yet another category can be of organic compounds, where the pollens and spores of plants come. So depending on what type of organism it was, what kind of chemical composition it was, the microfossils are named accordingly. In contrast to microfossils, here we have the macrofossils. As the name suggests, they are macroscopic in nature. That means they are large enough to be seen without any use of microscope or magnification. They are also called as megafossils. Here you can see a macrofossil of a dinosaur is represented. So which is large enough. You don't require any magnification or microscope to view it. Next category of fossil is quite interesting, which is called as subfossils. As the name suggests, they are subfossils, means they are yet to be fossilized completely. They are partially fossilized organisms or their parts. As you can see, a dodo skeleton subfossil here, which is not completely fossilized form yet. Now the question comes, what is the reason of this incomplete fossilization? There can be various reasons, and two important one can be the time which is required for complete fossilization. Probably that has not elapsed yet, and we could retrieve the fossil before that. So that is why you do see a subfossil formation of that. Another reason can be the conditions which are required for fossilization that have not been met. So due to these improper conditions, the fossil has not been completely formed yet. Moving ahead, there is a category which we call as Bioclass. Now Bioclass are nothing but the fragments of biological origin, which can be as a shell fragment or fossil. They are occurring in a sedimentary rock, so they are called as bioclast. Here is an example of limestone of crinoids. A very fascinating type of fossil is coprolites. As the name suggests, they are copro. Copro refers to dung in Greek, and lithos mean stone. So they are basically the dung stone. In general, they are fossilized fecal matter. If an organism's fecal matter is getting fossilized, we call that as coprolites. They were first described by William Buckland in 1829. As you can see, one of the crocodile's coprolite here. Now the question is, how do these fecal matter serve as an important piece of information in paleontology? Remember, these coprolites indicate the diet and predation of extinct organisms. Means, depending on the composition of coprolites, you can predict the type of diet that organism used to have. You can predict whether these organisms were having predatory nature or not. What kind of predation they used to have. So all these information you can retrieve based on this fossilized fecal matter. Hence, coprolites is also an important type of fossils. Gastroliths is another interesting fossil type, which are nothing but fossilized gizzard stones, which are usually found in case of reptiles. Here you can see a plesiosaur gastroliths. Gastroliths are nothing but these stones which are found in the gizzard of organisms that help to grind food to pieces as the stomach muscle squeezes to and fro, and they usually are found in case of reptiles. So these stones, when get fossilized and you find them as a fossil, we name them as gastroliths. So again, they also provide lots of information about which organism they belong to, what kind of organism it was, the size of the organism, the feeding habits of the organism, and so on. Another category is the burrows and borings, which is a type of trace fossil. A burrow is an excavation produced by an organism in a hard ground. Now remember, this is a hard ground excavation produced by the organism. As you can see here, this is a petrozestis boring in a hard ground. Similar thing is the boring, which is an excavation produced and maintained by an organism for various purposes that may include simple dwelling there, feeding, or mating there. This is a burrow fossil in the form of a Scolitos. Now, there is a minor difference between burrows and borings. Individual grains in burrows are pushed aside when the organism makes it, whereas the grains are cut in place in borings. So in borings, the grains are cut in place. There is no shuffling, there is no movement of the grains. In case of burrows, there is a shuffling or pushing aside of the grains. Usually this is a soft material or soft ground, and the borings are hard grounds. Another category of trace fossil is tracks and trails. Tracks are nothing but the markings of movement, which in general language we call as footprints. So these footprints also get fossilized at times. Similar thing is trails, but the patterns in trails are more irregular. They are often made on soft sediment beneath the water surface. If these impressions are covered with sediment well before they get washed away, so that means if these footprints or markings are not washed away and they are covered with sediments, they get preserved as fossils. Here you can see a picture of a track of a cat which was belonging to Cenozoic era that has been casted here and shown here. So these tracks and trails also provide indirect information about the movement of the organisms. The last category in the types which we can discuss here is called as pseudo fossil. In fact, it is not a fossil at all, but we are considering it as a type just to demarcate that these are the inorganic subjects. Remember, all the fossils do contain the organism's organic matter, but here these fossils are inorganic in nature and they do appear like fossils. They are mistaken for fossils, but they are not the actual fossils. As you can see here, this is a manganese dendrite crystal on a limestone bedding, but it appears as if it is a fossil or compression or impression of a fossil.